Welcome to Excel Magic Trick number 1053. If you want to download this workbook, click on the link below the video. Hey, back in Excel Magic Trick 152, I said the best new feature in Excel 2013 was the recommended chart and pivot table. And then I said, well, I guess that's debatable. Here's another absolutely amazing new thing in 2013. Now, in the video I did what's new in Excel 2013. I have tons of examples in there. And someone, Richard below in the comments, said, hey, you should show the distinct count function. Now, in that video, I did mention it, and I showed you the DAX distinct count when you're building DAX formulas in Power Pivot. But no way, there's distinct count inside of the pivot table itself. And here's the crazy thing. The product function has been around in pivot tables for a long time. But if you check the add this data to data model checkbox in the 2013 pivot table create dialog box, the product function will go away and distinct count will appear. So let's try it. Now, one thing that's nice to do is name your tables using the table features, because then they show up with a good name in the pivot table field list. So let's name this. I'm going to create a table Control-T. Tables mean that as you add new records, this is an expandable range. So the pivot table will pick up any new records when you refresh the pivot table. That's kind of nice. But we can name it. Go up to Design, and then right there it says Table 4. If you do this a lot, the keyboard is Alt-J-T-A. And then you could see up here that it's highlighted. And I'm going to call this Sales Table. Enter. Whoops, I see I had a miscapitalization, but that's OK. Now, let's create a pivot table. You could go up to Insert and Pivot Table. Now, the Pivot Table keyboard shortcut in earlier versions was Alt-NVT, but I only hit Alt-NV. In 2013, that's the new keyboard. There it is, this magic button. Add this to data model. I'm going to use, see that M right there? Since I'm doing this a lot these days, I'm going to use Alt-M. So Alt-NV M. But the thing about dialog boxes and these underlines for Alt is that you actually, it's together. You have to hold Alt and M together. For opening up stuff from the ribbons, it's a succession keyboard shortcut. So you hit Alt, then N, then V. But to get to underlines and dialog boxes, it's like a control key where you have to hold Control and C to do copy. Here you have to do Alt and M. Now I'm going to do Alt and E and then Tab and send my pivot table over here. But before, actually, let me send it right to cell F21. Another important thing about this data model is actually part of the Power Pivot engine. You do not have to have Power Pivot in your Excel to get access to this data model. And this data model, once we check this, will give us that new function. So I'm going to click OK. All right, now, our goal is to count unique dates for each one of these regions. So over here, there's my criteria. I need to do a unique count of dates for each region. So before I can access and get a unique count of all the dates, I need to isolate all of the dates and only get the East dates, and then do unique count. Now, formulas, array formulas, I have lots of videos on this in my book. Control-Shift-Enter shows you how to do this. There's an example of one there. There's an example of one there. They're both using Control-Shift-Enter. Guess what? This pivot table will replace that crazy array formula. I'm going to click right here. Now, because it's the date column, we want a unique count. The trick is you drag the unique date, the date field down to values. That allows us to do some function. Now, there's 11 aggregate functions. I'm going to click that drop down and say Value Field Settings. There it is. These are all the regular ones, and down at the bottom used to be Product, but it's not there anymore. Distinct count. So this gives us a distinct count. That gives us a distinct count of all the dates for just the date column. But no problem. You just drag your criteria down to rows. And just like that, there's our unique count. And that, if you know all the keyboards, is infinitely faster than formulas. Now, you know, the essential difference between pivot tables and formulas, well, these update instantly. So if you have a solution that needs, when you change the criteria, to everything to update instantly without refreshing, then use formulas. But pivot tables, I'm sorry, they are easy. And if the data changes, like we add new records over here, just right-click refresh. Whoops, you can't see that up there, but it's in that drop-down or in Analyze Refresh. Or the keyboard is Alt F5. That's the keyboard for refresh a pivot table if your cursor's in the pivot table. Now let's copy down this, because what's amazing about the pivot table, of course, that's a whole new pivot table, and I'm going to add a second criteria. So this is doing a unique count with 2 criteria. Oh, before we do that, why is this 5 here? 4 plus 3 plus 1, I think, is 8. It's because it's not a sum calculation in this column. This gives you grand total for the whole date column before we apply criteria. So get it? There could be duplicate dates. Of course, in the east, we could have 819, but we could also have 819 in the south. Down here, it only counts 819 one time. But up here, of course, there could be duplicates. All right. Let's click down here. And what we want, a second criteria. So I'm going to drag sales rep down to rows. And just like that, now I have Battalion and Gardenia, the 2 sales reps. A unique count for each one of those situations with 2 criteria. The same thing applies here, right? West only appears as a 1 up here, but of course there could be duplicates down here. And if you look up here at all the Wests, there are, oh, they're all 19. That's why we got a 1 right there for distinct count for the West. But up here, there's Battalion and Gardenia. So down here, of course, we get for West and West, we get a unique count for Battalion and Gardenia. So in essence, these tell us how many days that Battalion made phone calls in each region. Up here, this tells us unique days calls were made in each region. All right, we'll see you next trick.